Hello and welcome. My name is Stephanie Short. I'm Vice President of Partnerships at America Succeeds. America Succeeds is committed to improving equity, access, and opportunity in education. We are uniquely positioned between business and the education policy sector. We act as an education voice to business nationally and a business voice for education within the states, which is why I'm so excited to moderate this panel today with our incredible group of speakers. We're going to be digging into the role of applied learning in K-12 in preparing students with the skills, knowledge, and abilities they need to thrive within the future of work. But first, I really quickly want to set the stage. For over 40 years, the primary purpose of schools has been maximizing academic achievement. And in that same amount of time, we all know the world has greatly changed. We believe the purpose of education today is to ensure students can think critically and creatively, apply skills and knowledge to solving real-world problems, collaborate effectively with their classmates, and ultimately find fulfilling and meaningful ways to contribute to their world and their community. And so with that in mind, I'd like to open it up with our first question. How is this new purpose for education put into practice? How are Agile educators and their partners preparing students for the future of work? And Melissa, we'd love to dig in with you.
Great. Thanks for having me. I think there's a couple of things I think about when I think about what we do to prepare the students for the world of work. The first thing I think about is ensuring that all students have access to opportunities that let them see what the world of work is really like. There's that old adage, it's kind of old, even though it hasn't been around that long, that we're preparing the students for a world that we can't even identify just yet. So we need to get students out there. For the San Diego Met and for Met schools across the Big Picture Learning Network, that's internships and shadow opportunities. It's very different to read about a certain path or a certain professional opportunity versus going and embedding yourself in those opportunities and being able to be part of it. There's lots of ways to do that live and in person. And so part of it is opening up the scope of what's possible for students. The second thing I would say is we need to listen more. It was alluded to here at the beginning that this generation has a lot of voice and a lot of vision in terms of the world that they want to cultivate and live in. And a big part of our job is to pivot away from the single vision of what success might look like for students, that single vision of simply a four-year college degree, which certainly holds value. But there are so many other ways for students to be able to figure out what their choice-filled life is going to look like and what skills they need to be able to get there. And then the only other thing I would add is just absolutely piggybacking on what was just shared, and that is ensuring that any practice that we use at any level is developing students' abilities to collaborate with each other, to listen, to communicate, and to be creative. Because often what we know is that doing things the same old way doesn't work in a world that doesn't work the same old way. So it's about thinking outside of that box and getting students using their time less to be receptacles of information and more to be owners of their life path by experiencing what the options are in those life paths.
Melissa, I love that. And there's a great thread to pull on there, right? It's that these deeper learning relevant experiences for students are what really help prepare them for the future. So with that in mind, Devin, I would love to turn it to you to talk a little bit about altitude learning and your perspective in this space.
Yeah, thank you. It's just great to be here. This is a topic near and dear to my heart, partly because my mom and dad were both career technical education teachers. And so I just grew up in a household where we were always talking about the intersection between what happens in school and how we can make that relevant to prepare our students for the future. And so in my current role as Chief Impact Officer at Altitude Learning, we support about 120 districts across the country in shifting to what we call learner-centered education, which really builds off of what Melissa was saying. Learner-centered education is all about co-designing with each learner to help them know themselves and see themselves as full of possibility as a change maker. And it really anchors around some core practices, including cultivating learner agency, competency-based assessment, which gets at that expanded view of success that Melissa touched on, and then also what we call authentic learning experiences. So how do we get away from superficial learning that doesn't transfer into more of that deeper learning that really helps students to better understand how they learn and how to apply their knowledge, habits, and skills to solve real world problems. And our belief is that if our students know themselves and they're able to solve real world problems in a way where they're collaborating with others, they're going to be very successful in a context that's rapidly changing and in a workforce that's also rapidly changing.
And Devin, with that in mind, right, that sort of collaboration, that sort of classroom experience, it doesn't just happen. There's like a really critical role that the educator plays in that, and kind of connecting what's happening in the classroom to the real world of work. And so I'd actually love to jump in, Erin, with your perspective from LEAP, and how do we develop those educators? How do we start bridging the pathway, whatever that pathway might be after K-12?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Happy to be here as well. And I think, some of the things that Melissa and Devin have said are exactly that. How are we working with educators to really help our students develop those really critical skills, those collaboration skills, those agency skills? And so at LEAP, one of the ways we've done that is we've actually developed a framework that contains over 90 strategies to help our educators do just that. And it's really about helping our educators get to know their students deeply, but also helping then the students get to know themselves. What are their strengths, interests, and needs? How are they leading in their own learning, right? How are they becoming not just learner-centered, but also learner-driven? So we're really turning some of that ownership over to our learners. And then with Devin and the competency-based progressions, of course, that's a huge piece of it. How are we allowing our students to demonstrate mastery of their learning at their own pace when they're ready in the way that makes sense to them? And then also, I think a huge piece of this, which is what we're here to talk about today, is that connected piece, right? How are we connecting our learners to the world around them? And with so many different things, before the session, we were having such a great conversation around just so many different technological tools that are available to us to bring our students into this world that they might not normally have access to, so that their learning no longer depends solely on their zip code, but it's now open up to all of the really amazing things that are happening around the globe and, underwater even. That's something we were just talking about. And really bringing them into that world and showing them all of the different things that exist so they can start to develop those interests, and along that path, figure out what are they going to do? What amazing things are they going to do as they move forward?
Thanks, Erin. It's actually right. It's great because so much of this conference of ASU GSV is about ed tech and the innovations that are changing the way we learn, changing the way we work. I think panels have talked at length, right, about how the knowledge, skills, and abilities you need to succeed in today's workforce are different from what they were even just 10 years ago, right? Academics are the table stakes, and what employers really demand is a mastery of those soft skills to prepare you for any career path, which is actually a great time to kind of bring us up from the school level to that 30,000-foot global view. Josh, if you could share for us a little bit about your work at Walmart, because I think these pathways, right, they don't just end at K-12. They continue, and continuing to develop those soft skills is really key for upskilling, reskilling, and ensuring that long-term success.
Great, and thank you for that question. I think at Walmart, what we really aim to do is to remove the friction from working, learning, and advancing. And so what I've heard here is exactly what we believe: 21st century skills, soft skills, whatever you want to call them, around collaboration, around using the tools at your disposal to fix something, around effective communication, effective conflict resolution. All of those are critical skills to be successful. And so at Walmart, if you were to ask managers, what do you hire on? They would say, we hire on attitude, and that we train for technical. And so at Walmart, going back to Melissa's point, we really embrace a multiple pathways approach. So we have a $1 a day degree program called Live Better You. And so if an associate wants to go to school and develop those technical skills to further advance in Walmart or out of Walmart, they can. But as we embrace that multiple pathways, we began adding career diplomas. We started adding other credentials, because while college is great, and I would encourage everyone who wants to choose a pathway to do that, there are other pathways to success as well, and we need to embrace those too.
Josh, there's a really interesting piece here. We had all previously connected, and one of the points that was raised was there's what we like to call on our team the 4 C's, the critical thinking, creativity, communication, collaboration. But if we were talking about the really essential skills, there's a 5th one that's missing there. And we talked about digital literacy. Like in today's world, there is no job that isn't a tech job, right? So you have to have some fluency in this. And Devin, I might put you on the spot. You had framed it up for us in the sense that we need to start thinking about it like a competency briefcase that a student is sort of carrying throughout their life. Can you just bring us back to that?
Yeah, so I think, for a long time, we've thought about outcomes for learners as being static and also episodic. And really what we need is to be thinking about learning as a journey. And we need to be thinking about how we can demonstrate holistic learner outcomes. And so, yeah, the analogy I gave was that it needs to be like a data backpack for students that turns into a digital briefcase as an adult. And the competencies that employers are looking for in terms of agency, collaboration, problem solving, they're the same types of things that we should be emphasizing in K-12 beyond just knowledge, because knowledge is not enough in the current climate. You need to be able to transfer that knowledge into communities of practice and into solving real world problems. So I think there's a real opportunity ahead of us to reimagine what we think success looks like, how we can certify or track those competencies. In my view, it needs to be something that's portable and owned by the learner in a way that opens up a lot of doors, not only within the conventional educational system, but also outside of school as well.
Hey, Devin, can I piggyback off of that? I think one thing that at Walmart we really hit home is learning is a journey and it's a lifelong adventure. And, as a former middle school teacher, I always thought, gosh, you make it to the 8th grade, then you make it to high school and you get your diploma. And it was always like a milestone and then it was over. And I think the narrative is actually, it's never over. And at Walmart, to your point, we're rolling out a learning and employment record pilot where our associates earn digital badges as they progress in their career. And the more badges you have, the more advancement opportunities that are available to you. And so I just think the narrative has to shift from you get a degree or you get a certificate or whatever, and that's good for the rest of your life, to actually skills don't have that long of a shelf life and we need to learn continuously. So couldn't agree more.
Josh, you raise a great point. What we're talking about in a lot of ways is how do you as the individual signal your employer post K-12 and when you're in K-12 as a student, signal your administrators, the school system and otherwise that you're ready to sort of progress on to that next step. And what you're talking about truly is that like competency-based education. And it looks there's so many different ways that you can potentially break it down. But both Melissa and Aaron, I would love to get your perspective on kind of how do we better integrate sort of that competency model, that continuous learning with this deeper learning experience. What does the classroom need to look like, or what does school need to look like in the future so those signals aren't crossing as often?
I'll jump in. I think that there are a couple of things that come to mind. I think, first of all, we can't look at non-cognitives or competencies. Again, there's so many different terms for it. We can't look at them through the same lens of benchmarks that we used to look at content, right? I instead of being linear, I think we have to think about them as swirls that constantly are revisiting themselves and looking at growing from a swirl, right? And so I think that takes a real a paradigm shift in the way that we think about what education is, right? Thinking more about mastery-based, thinking more about competency-based, instead of assuming, the old way was, well, I gave a test, you didn't pass it, I'm so sorry, but we need to move on because we need to cover. And it's time to uncover and start digging, because I think the more a student gets a chance to practice the skills, content is important, but particular content really isn't, right? And so being able to take some time to step back with a student and ask them to solve really hard problems, and not because there's a right or wrong answer to them, but because it is their answer that they have thought through a series of activities within a classroom that's asked them to explore a meaty question, right? So rather than attempting to define, facts, we have students endeavoring to understand processes and to understand different parts of their own lives, and then that thinking becomes applicable. So I think one of the things I worry about sometimes is that we as educators like to presume that previous structures will work if you just add a new content. But this sort of approach to helping students develop that vision is not the same as exploring a linear-based approach to learning, a beginning and an end. This is a process. Josh just said it, right? We're learning constantly throughout our lives. And so rather than having kids think this is an end point, no, this is a process. And so that's what I would add. Here's the other thing I want to add too. I think it's important to acknowledge that one of the things we say at Big Picture, I love when Carlos Moreno says it. He says, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And all too often, it's really important to remember that particularly kids from poverty, kids of color, kids who don't come from families who may have access, ensuring that they're getting to visit and to see and to experience the world of work, that gives them touchstones and people and places and experiences to be able to draw from that all too often kids who come from those zip codes, like Aaron alluded to, that don't have access to those things that everybody should, this gives them a whole different doorway into their world. So that's what I would say. We have to stop thinking like this and we have to start thinking like this.
Yeah, I love that idea, and the idea of a journey, as well as the idea of social capital, right? That's hugely important to help our young people develop that social capital, to build their social capital, regardless of where they are and what opportunities exist kind of within their neighborhood or their community. I think we have to help them expand that. And so when I think about, everything Melissa said, I also think, part of this is that journey is extending outside of our school walls. And so how are we making sure, as students are in a competency-based system or a mastery-based system, that they're also able to then demonstrate that mastery or practice those skills outside of school? And how are they getting credit for all of those things that they're able to then show they know, whether they learned it in a school building, in a classroom with me as the teacher, or they were able to do it in an internship, or simply just something they were exploring on their own outside of that school building. I think it's really critical that they're not having to repeat those things inside school just because learning only happens in those four walls. But how are we making sure that they're able to have credit, to get credit, and to demonstrate, mastery of everything they know, so that they can proceed on their journey, and that journey will take them in all sorts of different pathways and progressions along the way.
Erin, I love that for two reasons in this particular moment. I think first, now more than ever, we know that learning happens everywhere. And in this current context, in many cases, learning is happening over Zoom, at a kitchen table, in a bedroom. If beyond all of the issues with the digital divide and the equity there, right, in contexts that aren't necessarily the ideal for that deeper learning space, right? So Melissa, to your point, how do we keep equity in mind at the center of developing these multiple pathways? And how do we recreate this experience in the world of COVID when everything is so digital and so remote?
So I think one thing that I always remind myself is the technology itself is not the answer. It's just a tool. I remember hearing these discussions a lot when it was very much in vogue to do one-to-one iPads for everybody at schools, right? That was a big thing for a while. And of course, those things didn't move matrices for students to be able to see themselves as learners or to be able to succeed. And so I think, first of all, what we have to ask ourselves is, what can we do to shift learning experiences to value those things we know students need? And how can the tool of an online learning world be made available? Now, all of that, of course, course, presumes that we're going to address the digital divide, that we're going to look at the massive number of students in lots of areas that don't have access to reliable internet or to reliable technology that affords them that space. So in light of that, I think thinking how can we give students access to professionals? You know, at the Met, we can't do internships right now, which is a vital and pivotal part of what we do. So we've replaced that with workshops where we have reached out to professionals who say yes, because a lot of them are at home right now. And we've been pretty surprised at who has said yes. But we have a workshop that's about to start with a mindfulness counselor who said, yeah, I'd be happy to do a six series, offer it to anybody at the Met who would want to join us. And so we are asking people, and we're getting the answers that we want. And we're hoping what that means is this is going to set up an expectation. The other thing we've done is set up a speaker series where we can't send students out to shadow or to be able to experience those places live. But what we can do is offer twice a week a different professional to come in and talk about their pathway, talk about the struggles that they overcame. And this year, with the call to action in San Diego being around anti-racist education and access for all students, we've prioritized people who are working in, I hate this term, but atypical for who they are, like female scientists, which I hope that all dies soon, but I'll use the rhetoric that's out there. So being able to afford students twice a week the chance to embed for an hour with a professional and hear their story and see what they do. And we've partnered with people in Miami who have come in and done speaker series. Poets that live in Virginia have come in and done speaker series with us. So one of the things we do know is that we've been able to provide an experience that has just blown our minds based on who is saying yes. And then for us, the ability to just record the Zoom and then provide it to students in ways that they may not need to worry about relying on their internet access, but we can get it to them another way so they can watch it even offline. So I think it's about thinking about what's the purpose and what's the hope and what's the goal, and let's throw out the way we usually do it. How can we do it now? So technology is a tool to make that accessible. It's not the be all and end all, right?
To chime into, I would say when it comes to equity, data doesn't lie. Data tells a very accurate story. And so when I'm looking to make philanthropic investments in programs that can upskill people, I don't look at, did they master standard 1.2, whatever. I'm looking at, did they complete? And did that lead to an immediate wage increase or a wage increase within 3 months, thereby removing the predictability of success based upon your background? And so I think to really hit home this equity question, we have to really look at the data, interrogate it, and make sure we're tracking the right thing at the right level. I'm not sure tracking every potential outcome that a student can know is great. What are the bigger picture outcomes that we do want to track that would be meaningful for a student who's looking to grow in a career, grow economically? So I would just say, look at the data.
Josh, thank you for that. And Devin, Aaron, I would love to like put you on the spot a little bit on that front. Right? Technology is very much changing the way we learn, and data very much shapes those investments. So how are you seeing that play out in your work?
I think, I think for us, I really agree with what Melissa said. Technology is a tool, right? And it's a very critical tool, and it's become even more critical right now. And so we're seeing a lot of interesting things happening just in the schools we work with. And, one of the things that we've seen is, for the classrooms in the schools that had a strong technology practice in place before the pandemic happened, they're seeing a lot of success now. Versus we've had, some schools and some classrooms that didn't have as strong practices in place in the classroom when it came to technology, and then they're having some struggles now. So I think it goes back to some of those earlier conversations we were having around kind of that idea of digital fluency or digital literacy, is how do we make sure that it is a part of everything that is happening right now and into the future, right? It's a tool that should always be there to help us do what we need to do, whether we're students or as adults even, right? So how are we ensuring that our students are ready for that? So when we think about equity, we're leveling the playing field, at least when it comes to digital literacy or when it comes to digital fluency, and we're giving everyone, the same starting point. And so yes, there are a lot of things that, infrastructure wise we'll need to solve, and I hope we do very soon. But I think that's a tool that is going to only become more and more important. And I think as we think about what the future of education is, I don't think we'll go back to the way we used to be. At least I hope we don't go back to the way we used to be. It's not a way we should go back to, right? So how are we looking at what we're learning during this time when so much is remote and so much is hybrid and so much is based in technology? And how are we using those learnings to then really create new ways for learning to happen as we move forward? And hopefully and ideally, we're able then to access some of the students that we aren't able to reach when we are in person. But how do we access and reach those students in a different way? I love Melissa saying, there are different ways that you're reaching your students. And that's a critical point too. There isn't just one way. So we need to take advantage of all of the ways that we have available to us.
Yeah, I love that. And also, touching on what Josh was mentioning about the grain size, like just because we have an abundance of data doesn't mean that all of it is equally valuable at a particular point in time or has the same utility. And sometimes what we end up doing just because we have data is orienting to things that are very granular, these sort of very specific linear outcomes that Melissa was talking about. And unfortunately, those aren't the things that are going to create enduring success for. So the schools that we're working with, the ones that are having the most success are orienting to milestones that are at a higher level. So thinking about things like communication, collaboration, and then what are the sub-competencies that relate to that broader outcome. And I did a research project looking at 21st century outcomes, called it the Imp Work, and found that for the most part, what we think we ought to be orienting to are agency, collaboration, and problem solving. Who am I as an individual? How do I know myself? How do I set and achieve my own goals? In terms of collaboration, how do I communicate? Am I empathetic? Am I compassionate? Am I a good global citizen? Do I have cultural awareness and competency? And then on the problem solving, can I apply my knowledge, habits, and skills to solve complex, messy problems, the spiraling types of things that Melissa was talking about? And we believe that if you really orient to those broader outcomes around agency, collaboration, and problem solving, and think about what are all the different data inputs that give you some understanding about who a learner is and where on their journey, it's going to really best prepare each and every one of us to be contributors, problem solvers, and that's what we need in the world right now.
What I really love about that is we just, we had a really great conversation with one of the schools we work with just recently, and they were talking about one of their students who is at home taking care of siblings. We know that's happening in a lot of places right now. And when I think about all of those skills that you just talked about, those are skills that child is now demonstrating, right, by taking care of siblings, right? Collaboration with the family, with the siblings, problem solving. We know all the problem solving that goes into caring for little ones. And so much agency and building that sense of self for that student too, realizing what they are capable of outside of the school building. And so to that point of data, like how are we able to start thinking about or measuring those different kinds of pieces of data and really starting to help not just our students, but our teachers understand what our students are really, really capable of that may or may not be seen in a regular school day.
I think there's also two different kinds of data, right? There's the granular data that has been alluded to that I think may sometimes harken us back to the idea that our kids are going to get behind. Well, behind what? Behind what matrices? Behind who says? Behind those old ideas? Okay, well, maybe we should pivot away from that. And then there's the higher level stuff that gives us those real big indications about the direction we need to go in. I think for me, if we're not a little careful about what we're counting, then I think we have to be... if we're not careful, it will harken us back to getting back into like benchmarks and the learning being encapsulated in the curriculum rather than in those, we don't need to repeat them, we all say them a bunch, the 21st century skills that employers are looking for. And so not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that's counted counts. And so I think remembering that anecdotal data, asking ourselves what natural learning is happening right now. If I can't get the student involved in that synchronous class, what's naturally happening, and how can I create a system and structure around that student that's going to help them grow in their efficacy, grow, like how do I do that? And that, I think, is work that's very interesting right now. And then I think connecting that to, I'd love to see more data points that are generated by students where they're naming what they want to get better at, and then they're identifying, I am getting better at my communication, and here's my evidence, right? My exhibition went from 5 minutes last year to 10 minutes, and I could have gone 15, and I felt a sense of like purpose in what I was saying. I'd like to see those sorts of data points. I'd love to see more schools that are offering that. Like, let me show you the data that our students generated based on their personal learning plans. So I just worry that those data points sometimes can pull us backwards, and we need to make sure the data points are ones that are pulling us forward. Sorry.
Melissa, those data points you mentioned, though, that's exactly what we want out of the workforce, right? It's not just what we want out of students today. It's what we want out of colleagues. It's what we want out of employees. The competencies Devin's talking about, that's what we want to see in everybody to be successful. And Josh, I would love for you to kind of dig in here as well, in helping kind of wrap that up. Actually, if we could tie a perfect bow, I think, on the panel, that's what it is, right? Is that learning never stops, and those core skills are something that we need to happen across really the whole spectrum, kids and adults. But we have a really interesting question from the audience here that is kind of rooted in where we are today, which is, what's the one thing we're going to focus on when we get sort of back to work? Not that the work necessarily ever stopped, but like when we get back to it, what's the one thing that each of you are going to focus on to bring about positive change to get us to this new purpose?
So Stephanie, I can jump in there, and Walmart, we haven't stopped working since the pandemic started in March, and our frontline associates have done a phenomenal job keeping their communities stocked with food and the essentials that they need to live. But we had to pivot how we taught our associates the skills that they needed to be successful. Pre-March, they would physically go to one of our 202 academies across the country to level set on the skills that they need. But post-March, that is not the case. And so our digital acceleration has really accelerated even more. So now our associates are learning core skills through augmented reality and virtual reality. You see, if you go to a Walmart, you'll see a big orange tower in the store. That's our pickup tower. You go, you swipe a code, your order pops out really quickly, but they tear up. And so there's an AR, augmented reality module that our associates in stores can do to learn how to fix those quickly. And not only, when we started rolling out trainings like that, what we found is more associates wanted to learn. They were like, oh, if I can learn this way, sign me up, because I can actually do something and know that I can be successful at it, as opposed to sitting in a classroom, which is equally as valuable, but this is more hands-on, tactical, and really hits home the world in which we live in now, which is a digital world, and that's not going to slow down.
Thank you, Josh. I love that, right? The one thing being, well, if we could sum it up with one thing, then moving to that continuous learning, leveraging technology and the digital experiences. Devin, what's your one thing?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Josh said, and I'm definitely spending time and energy thinking about learner records and assessment that matters. But I think, a lot of the changes we're discussing are things that I felt needed to happen before COVID, and the disruption and the crisis and the trauma in our society just reinforces the urgency of these changes. We need learners to be active. We need them to be lifelong learners. We need them to know themselves. And to me, the way that we're going to speed up that collective change is as a collective and as a community. And so the thing that I'm most oriented to is how do we build an ecosystem that can really support each and every learner? How can we partner together, use our complementary strengths in a way that's going to get us to a tipping point faster so that our kids are better served by the system structures and communities that they live in.
Devin, keeping in mind, right, that we really need to just accelerate this change. Now that many students are empowered by the digital resources, virtual world, how can we make sure schools continue to support that momentum, continue to build partnerships, continue to innovate? I think to your point, right, this is a culture change, and changing culture can be really hard. So Melissa and Aaron, I'd love for you to weigh in. How do we keep this momentum moving forward?
So my sincere hope is that we don't all end up back in a building whenever that happens and start trying to figure out how to get kids all the content or classes they missed. What my sincere hope is that what will happen when we start getting kids back is that we first celebrate, tell us about what you learned, tell us about how you grew, tell us about the challenges you overcame, right? Using that as an opportunity to acknowledge every single kid, from the kid who might end up being valedictorian to the kid who might not make it through. Every single kid has learned something incredibly valuable during this time that could not have been taught in a classroom situation. So how about we start there? And then we build from there towards that idea of, so from that, how can we build those sorts of skills into making you somebody who can be reflective, who can be thoughtful, who can apply those incredible life lessons? Because I don't want to look at the class of 2021, 2022, 2023 as a deficient class. They are the opposite of that. They are classes that are coming out actually having gotten a taste of what the world could be like, because they are being thrown in those very different, they're having to problem solve every day, whether it be, why isn't my Zoom connecting? Or how do I get my sister to stop crying so I can get onto class? Or I can't get onto class because I got to figure out how to make lunch. They're problem solving every day. So how do we name that, value it, celebrate it, and move it forward without ending up with a bunch of stressed out kids that are now behind 3 semesters, 2 semesters? No, let's pivot. Let's pivot. Let's use this for what it's intended to be. And so I think those are structures that I think there's an opportunity there for a lot of us to sit back and say, oh gosh, what could that look like, right? How do we now center the non-cogs and not center the content? And this is the pivot point. We're right here. We're sitting in the pivot point, but we have to do that work purposefully. And we have to actively push against those structures that are going to want to say, well, did they learn all the standards of Algebra 2? Maybe, but let's also take a look at this other amazing opportunity that actually has greater ramifications for their ability to transition into the world of work than anything else. So,
yeah, I mean, I think we should do everything that's already been said. I love, we need the ecosystem. We really need to celebrate all of our kids and all of the things that they've learned and they've accomplished. And when I think about kind of what's next after that, when I think about, as a teacher, what could we be doing? I think it's some of the things that have already started that we just need to really double down on. And that's purpose, relevance, and ownership. Like, what is the purpose of what we're doing? So when we think about our curriculum, or when we think about going back and we start to get that deficiency mindset, it's like, what is the purpose of all of these things? And do we really need to do all of those things? Or are there a lot of things we should be celebrating and leveraging that have already happened? And is it relevant to the time that we're in now? We're all going to go back to a different world. And so are those things relevant to the world that we are now in? And then ownership. It's really about like, who's owning that learning? And so, our students have really taken ownership of their learning in this time. They're at home, they're getting themselves onto their Zoom classrooms, they're tracking their learning, they're managing their time, they're setting their learning plans. Like, we can't go back to then the teacher being in control. So we have to make sure that ownership still lives with our learners, and that they then now have all of the tools and the data and the resources that they need to really start to push themselves forward.
Thank you, Erin. Knowing that it's ASU GSV and we have a mix of entrepreneurs and educators, really innovative thinkers, what would you say for the business leaders in the room and the entrepreneurs in this room? How do we, as folks kind of more likely sitting community members, parents, how do we support this momentum? What would you say to those folks about helping us achieve this culture change within schools?
I mean, I think the easy one is get involved, right? Like, I think we've heard a lot about the importance of kids having access to things outside of their school building. And so how that's a really overwhelming endeavor as a teacher sitting in a classroom, or for many principals sitting in a school building. So having access to those things, I think, having community members or business professionals in the neighborhood come and say, like, I want to be a part of this. I want to do something to help expand, for our youth, all of the things that they're being exposed to. I think that's one step in the right direction to say then, for schools then to have something to take advantage of, and it grows and builds from there. And then we start to think about the social capital and the ecosystem, and we're building those organically. So I think getting involved. But Josh, I'll pitch it over to you. I think you have something brilliant.
Sure, thanks. I would say don't do it alone. In the workforce development space, since March, there have been so many alliances of unlikely players coming together to really remove the friction from working, learning, and advancing. And two of those are the Rework America Business Network and also the Skill Up Alliance. And so no matter where you're at, think about what unique capability you can bring to the ecosystem where you're at and do your unique thing. Don't think you have to have an end-to-end solution, because not very many players in the ecosystem actually do that well. So think about the strategic alliances that you can create to really catalyze and accelerate the change that you want.
I would say similar to what's already been said, and I love everything that's already been said, is we don't have to have a monolithic approach to what these different stakeholders can do to help support this pivot in education. One of the things that we have seen is just reach out, like say, hey, we have a think tank going on around this idea. Hey, high school in my area, is there any kids that might be interested in joining? Figure out how you can provide that mentorship, particularly again from that social justice angle. See what you can do about pulling in underrepresented kids from the area that you're working in. If you're looking around and realizing there aren't enough women in this field, there aren't enough Latinos in this field, there aren't whatever, reach out and give that, because sometimes just giving kids an experience and being willing to offer space for students to come and participate. I'll tell a very small story. When we were doing internships, I took a student for an interview at a lab at one of our local universities. And this was a startup lab. And I was surprised that this lab was willing to work with high school students, but I took him for the interview anyway. And at the end, the two people running that lab said, we're going to hire him. And I knew that there were college kids right outside the door waiting to hire. And I said, can I just ask a question? Sorry about the noise. Why would you want to hire a high school student when you've got college kids outside? And they said something very interesting. They said, often high school students are not wrapped up in the box that college can often put thinking in. They're thinking creatively. They sometimes will see something and make a connection that we think, oh, whoa, what was that idea? And it will take us down a very creative path. And they said, we like having a high school student here because sometimes they're just watching, but often they'll say things that will completely pivot our thinking because they're not locked into the box of